We are live on Christmas Eve here at the Chocolate Life Live. Welcome, everybody, to our live stream today. So welcome, everybody, to the Chocolate Life Live here for Christmas Eve. I'm joined today by John Malik and Keith Ayoob, both John and are contributing authors to the Chocolate Life. And we wanted to get together today to look back at 2021, to look forward at 2022. And I want to say, before I start out, and before you guys introduce yourself and what it is that you're doing, that I had a lot of fun doing that intro movie. Create a sort of a superhero style trailer. John is wearing his Christmas sweater. It's a great thing. And John, I noticed that you're chomping on something. What are you chomping on today?
Keith, how come we didn't send Clay like a Christmas sweater or something like that?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually don't own a Christmas sweater.
I mean Clay.
I know, yeah, but I probably should. I did think of wearing a bright red turtleneck, but it tends to. I did it once before, and it tends to throw it dominates everything. So I thought, well, I'll go subtle.
Right. So I'm eating. Thank you for asking. I'm eating chocolate babka. It's chocolate sourdough babka.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if anybody watched the trailer, we actually talked about butter, I think, in the trailer. We really didn't talk about the sourdough, but we have this really, really fun connection around sourdough. But before we get into it, Keith, do you want to spend a few seconds saying hello and introducing yourself to everyone?
Yes, I am actually, I'm Keith Ayoob. I am, my professional organization is the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and I'm on the faculty of a medical school, the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, where I am an associate professor emeritus now, because I'm sort of retired, of pediatrics. And I also do a lot of work in the private sector, providing a lot of counsel to various commodity groups. Over the years, when people say, well, do you have anything to declare if I'm giving a presentation? I want to always say, how far back do you want to go? I have worked with every commodity. All of them you think are fighting each other. They're not. I always think I'm just in the business of promoting good food. I actually got another really cool study about chocolate that I'll tell you about later. So it was this morning, which I thought about sending you, Clay, but I thought, this is not a read for the faint of heart. It's really technical. So I will provide a summing up, but it's fun.
Well, I think that many people who are part of the Chocolate Life and have been for quite some time can be certifiable chocolate geeks, and so happy to go and talk about that. But John, one of the things you started contributing to the Chocolate Life last year, right? You were in Belize, you were on sabbatical, I suppose, and you were doing some work in the Toledo district, Punta Gorda, with some people, it turns out, that I know. And you wanted to share some of what it is that you had done down there. So there's a series of posts, and we'll get to that in a little while. But one of the things that just really, 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 really caught my interest is you were talking about making sourdough, but making sourdough that was somehow influenced with cocoa. And so can you sort of walk through, you're talking about that?
So I made a sourdough starter, and when I make a fresh starter, I'm usually going to use leaves of a non-poisonous tree, right?
So a non-poisonous tree, excuse me, just a non-poisonous tree is going to be a tree that has fruit that is edible, or we know that the leaves themselves are non-poisonous?
Correct.
Okay.
Part two. So whenever I've done this, I've always get the question, it's like my least favorite questions is can I substitute margarine? No, you can't substitute margarine for anything. And then number two is, can I use just will any leaf do? So I've done it in the past with pecan and hickory and blueberry and peach and apple and some stuff out of our yard. And what I started doing in when I was in Toledo is showed my hostess how to make a starter with cacao leaves, right? And I extracted the wild yeast off the leaf, put it into the flour, and then made a sourdough starter from that. And and that was cool.
Can you explain the process of doing that? So
Sure.
how if I had some fresh leaves, and let's just say I have some fresh cocoa tree leaves for fresh cacao, how would I go about making a starter from fresh cacao leaves?
So you're gonna put the leaf into a bowl of flour, and I usually like to start with about 15 leaves or so. You're gonna put it into flour and let it sit there for a few hours, and then I like to encourage it. I'll put the leaf between my hands like that, and I'm gonna rub a little bit. So I've got flour and the leaf, and I'm not gonna like bear down so that I'm crumbling the leaf. Well, all I'm trying to do is to extract the wild yeast off the leaves, right?
Mm-hmm.
And drop it and let it drop into my bowl of flour. And maybe that's a cup and a half of flour, right?
Okay.
And then I'm gonna do that with the leaves. And then the next day I'm gonna come back and maybe I'm gonna do it again. And then third day I'm gonna pull the leaves out, maybe sift the flour, make sure I don't have any little chunks of wood or tiny little bits of leaf or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm going to put some tap water in, some clean water. So if you're somewhere where the water's chlorinated, you're going to use bottled water. And equal amounts, if you've got a cup of flour, you're going to put roughly a cup of flour, and then you're going to stir it together. And you're going to end up with a slurry that's the texture of maybe like loose Play-Doh or pudding or something like that, right?
John, you said a cup of flour, and I think you meant a cup of water, right?
Correct.
Right.
Well,
Okay.
what did I say?
You said a cup of flour, and you're going to have a cup of flour.
Did I say that?
Yeah. So basically, you want to.
We're live, folks.
You want a hydration. So.
It's the hot chocolate talking.
Oh yeah, mine too.
So now what you've done is now remember there's going to be wild yeast already in the atmosphere wherever you are. There's going to be some inherent in the flour already. And now what you want to do is you want to extract the yeast that's off of a certain tree. You're gonna add that water. You're gonna stir it in. You're gonna cover it with a cloth. You're gonna leave it alone for 24, 48 hours, and it's gonna start to smell like your gym socks, right? Mm-hmm. What happens first is the bad bacteria has to cook off. Eventually, the good yeast inside is going to start to bubble up, and it's going to reproduce, and it's going to overwhelm the bad stuff. But that's probably going to take you 10 days. Mm-hmm. So every other day, what I'm going to do is add in a little bit of flour, maybe like a quarter cup, and maybe that much water, and stir it in, right? And now by day 4 or 5, what I'm going to do is maybe before I add my flour and water, I'm going to take a little bit of this stuff out and get rid of it. Now I'm going to add my flour and water, stir that in. Mm-hmm. Day 6, day 7, the starter, by day 7, the aroma should change. Because I'm going to smell it every day. And the first couple days, it's like, it's putrid. And then it turns towards maybe more towards blue cheese. And then when it's ready, it's going to smell closer to maybe a nice saison, like a beer or a champagne aroma. there's literally hundreds and hundreds of varieties of yeast. And you don't know what you're going to get until you try. I've got some clay. I've got some craft beer yeast I bought off Amazon. I have 5 different yeasts.
Oh wow!
And yeah, no. So next week I'm going to make like 3 or 4 new starters with yeast from.
This is all.
Before we go on to Keith and talk about the connection there, what I want to do is I want to say hello to Laura, Marion. Laura, thank you very much.
Laura.
Sending a comment in. You're watching on Facebook. You could also be watching on YouTube or on LinkedIn. If you go into the comments and put something into the comment section, we should be able to see it. And if you've got a question, we can respond to it today. But I want to say, Laura, thank you very much for joining us today. And thank you for the hiya back. So Keith, on one of the clubhouse rooms after John had talked about that, somebody sent me a message and said, oh, I can buy fresh cocoa pods at stores here in New York City. And you and I corresponded, and you said, ooh, I have a sourdough starter and I'm willing to go by this place and get some pods. And so we met in New York City, in Manhattan, and we did a trade of things. And so have you experimented with the pods in your sourdough, or
I actually not? I wanted to grow a cocoa tree, and I was abject failure at this. It's not. I've learned it is not as easy as it sounds, because I sprout a lot of stuff. I've got a papaya tree going, and I've got date palms, which are very easy, and they grow very well. Chocolate, a little more difficult. So I'm not. It's not over yet. I'm determined. But I did actually put a little bit of the chocolate, the juice into my sourdough starter before I sprouted the seed. Well, tried to sprout the seeds. They ended up getting moldy. So, and there's going to be another attempt here, and we will just keep going until it works. But I started getting into sourdough. I always baked bread for a long time, but I never did sourdough until COVID happened and I couldn't get yeast. And I said, well, I've got about 2 packets, so let me get started on sourdough. And by the time the packets are done, I'll probably have a good sourdough starter. And my sourdough started going ape almost immediately. And it was by about the 3rd or 4th day, John, I think this was already exploding out of the 1 liter mason jar. And it was literally within like 2 hours. It just almost before my eyes I had to keep beating it down. I thought, this is like a horror movie. But I mean, people say, oh, it's good. I was on Facebook with it. They said, this is great. I said, but this is too soon. But I kept going with it. And then I expanded and did a second starter that was a somewhat drier starter. Yours, John, is sort of what they call a 1-to-1 hydration, or 100% hydration. So it's about half water, half flour. This one was about 3/4 water to 1 part flour. And it was a recipe I got from the Poilâne bakery in Paris, which is well known for its sourdough and other baked goods, mostly breads. And
what did she know?
What's that?
Right.
I said, what does she know?
I know. Well, actually, she put in a very nice cookbook and a whole. I actually ended up meeting her in Manhattan when she came to do a book tour, and she invited me to come, take a tour of the original, ovens in Paris. So we did that. It was really interesting, and they've been going. And their sourdough has been going on for like 90 years. Man. Continuously. So, I'm certainly not going to hold myself to that standard. My sourdough hasn't even been gone for like 90 weeks. So, but it's been interesting because I've been able to not have to buy yeast anymore. So and pretty much bake the bread for the family. And now it's been experimental. It's like I add a lot of inclusions. Funny, I don't like a lot of inclusions in my chocolate, but I do like a lot in my bread. So I've added everything from roasted pecans and cranberries to raisins, and the nuts and the dried fruit really work for me, and it really makes a good toast. And should we talk butter? I don't know.
Not quite ready to talk butter.
Okay, that's okay. But and this is all in addition.
We talk a little bit about chocolate.
This is all in addition to.
And so I wanted to ask Laura. She asked this question: what about nibs? And Laura, when you ask the question about nibs, in what sense do you want to know about nibs? I also want to say hello to Chef Jeffrey Gardner, who's out in the Los Angeles areas. Thank you very much for the well wishes, and certainly my best to you and yours and the rest of your family this holiday season. Well, I came to show and tell. I just wanted to let you know. So this is my sourdough that's going. Keith, you gave me a little bit of your starter.
Right.
And I've been nursing it now since sometime in October, I think it is. I knocked it down yesterday. So I've beaten all the bubbles and all the stringiness out of it. I took some out to actually start bread. I'm baking bread for Christmas Day. I mean, later today, I'm getting a video call with family members from around the United States. And one of the things we're doing is we're just having the camera on, and we're going to be doing stuff in the kitchen. We'll have an opportunity to communicate. So I have my bread rising in the oven right now, right? And after I get done here, I'm going to start baking it off. But I also wanted to show you this. I mean, I don't have leaves, John, right? And so what I've been doing is I've been taking the seeds and adding distilled water. Essentially, I just boil it off and then leave it open so that if there are any chlorine or anything like that, it just evaporates off. And then shake it. I don't want to shake it too close because this is the point at which the lid will fall off and get everything all over my computer. But I now have something which has some pulp. You can see it's pink here. It's not clear. So it's pulling some of the pulp off. And what I'll do is I'll take it out of the refrigerator several hours before I'm going to use it. And so it'll warm up and start bubbling. And this is what I use to feed my starter. So after I get to the point, I've probably got about 250 grams of starter in here. And so I'll take another 100 grams off to start the next loaf. And then with whatever's left, I do a 1-to-1. I'll add 1 part starter, 1 part flour, and 1 part juice, right? And that's what I use for the next step. And then I'll use it until I get down to a certain point, and then I'll feed it again. I'm a big fan of, I don't know if either of you know that there's a YouTube chef by the name of Ben Starr. And
yes.
he's got an approach which is called lazy, right? And it basically, I'm not worried about holes in my sourdough. I don't do the auto lees. I'm not worried about, really have big rises because holes in sourdough don't have flavor. It's the bread. So I'm not worried about, traditional kinds of texture. And I've been doing things, you talked about inclusion. So I add nutritional yeast. I will add almond flour. I've got the little tiny black rye, the tiny black seeds that are often used in rye bread.
You mean caraway seeds?
No, they're not caraway seeds. They're another kind of. And then I put them all together. Hold on a second. I pulled one out of the oven, so I have something that looks like this.
Oh, cool.
And you can see that it's a very, very loose texture. I'm always looking for something which is more like a focaccia, so in a loose way. 350 degrees for 45 minutes. Turn it up, and to get a crust, and that's what I'm going to be doing once I get done. Laura asked the question, and perhaps this is for you, Chef John. So in the bread, would you put nibs in later, or what would happen if you put them in the starter? So I go out and I buy nibs.
Yeah.
Would they have a beneficial effect if I put them in the starter? Or would you would you knead them in or mix them in when you're actually doing the dough for the bread? Or sprinkle them on top or sprinkle them on bottom? How would you approach that?
I think I would want the nibs finer, more along the lines of like ground coffee, maybe not quite that fine. The thing is like on your secondary fermentation, if you're going to stud your bread with something heavy, raisins, chips, whatever, they're going to want to sink to the bottom because the second time you ferment it, because you're going to ferment it in your usually you're going to do it in your baking vessel, or maybe you're going to do it on whatever is going to go into the oven or whatever. So all that stuff is going to sink to the bottom. So if they're heavy, if they have any mass to them, they're going to, start to work their way down towards the bottom. but I don't think they would add anything to a sourdough starter.
I don't, because they are essentially sterilized because they're roasted, right?
Yeah.
That's not quite true. I mean, depending upon, if you did them yourself, you may not get what's called a 5-9 kill step. You may not actually get rid of all the microbes that are on the outside of the bean. And so when you crack and winnow, you reintroduce any microbes that are on the outside of the bean into the nibs. And so,
and you'll also just in the course of handling them, introduce something. Excuse me.
You've got bacteria and yeast in your hands. There's bacteria and yeast in the air. You're going to introduce them. I think that the point being is that when you do, when you inoculate a starter, what you do is you want to inoculate it with a specific variety or varieties of yeast, and you want those yeasts to predominate. So, for example, John, if I started off inoculating something using the flour and leaf method you did, right? And then I took that flour and sent it to another part of the world. And then whenever I fed the starter, I used a local flour. Eventually, the local yeast varieties would come to predominate over the cocoa varieties, right? And so what you'd really want to do is every time you fed the starter, you'd want to use the flour that had been inoculated with the yeast from the cocoa leaves.
Right.
I mean, with the nibs, if I were doing it with nibs, I do like, John, the idea of grinding it a little bit. But I'd probably also mix it in when I was sort of, you don't really need sourdough too much, but when I was in that process of adding all the flour and kind of mixing it in, I'd probably add it then. But, I'd try it out, Laura, and see what works. See how it is. I don't know that it's going to, depending on how much you add, may not add a whole lot of chocolate flavor.
Right. And so one thing I do is that I have a very, very interesting Bolognese sea salt. So it's garlic and black pepper and rosemary, right? Sort of mixed into the salt, and it's various crystal sizes. And I use that on the top of the bread. Right. So, I try to minimally salt the bread itself. You want the salt in the bread, I understand, to inhibit the formation of, it helps the fermentation, just whatever the chemistry is. But I salt the top of the bread, right? And what you could do is you could actually you could sprinkle the nibs, especially if they're smaller, on the top. Or, I will often use polenta or a coarse cornmeal, right, in the bottom of whatever it is that I'm using as the cooking vessel to aid the release, right? So I always put olive oil in the bottom in it because I like the flavor and I like the texture as it cooks off, right? But if I add some cornmeal or something like that, I get a great texture. And so one of the things, Laura, you could do is you could oil your pan or butter your pan, or lard your pan. I mean, whatever it is.
We're going to talk about butter.
Oh yeah, we'll get there. And then you could put the nibs on the bottom, right? And so
that's a good idea.
Yeah, so they would, and then if you put the loaf on top of it, they would stick to the bottom of the loaf, and when you pulled them out and cut them, it would be, you're right, Laura. It might be better mixed in, lightly kneaded, right? So the point is
Laura's talking about butter.
Laura's talking about butter. But the point is. Experiment, have fun. I mean, there's no right way, there are no wrong ways. There are just the ways you like. And so let's go have fun and play with all of those things.
And Clay, you mentioned salt. Salt's a funny thing with sourdough because it's not just when you add it, but how you add it, to my understanding. It is necessary it kind of inhibits the growth of the yeast, but it doesn't obliterate it. If you don't add any salt, it starts rising way too fast and you don't get quite the flavor. Also, unsalted bread, I'm not a big fan of salt, but there are things that need a little bit of salt, and bread is one of them. But at the same time, I like to add it to the flour, not to the starter and the yeast, because then it gets too close in contact with the yeast and it can start killing it. So I don't like to add it until I'm going to add the flour. Starter and water and mix that in. Yep. Then add your flour that's been mixed in with the salt, and then it doesn't have quite such a direct contact with the yeast. Mm-hmm. So your risk of it will help the yeast, not kill it.
Right. And John, if I can, just taking a look at the babka, right? So So the babka is you have the dough, and then you're either swirling in or rolling in whatever the chocolate is, right?
Ooh, that looks good.
Right.
Not exactly.
Okay. So Laura, this might be another way to incorporate nibs, right? Thinking about what John is saying. So exactly how do you...
So the babka is a Eastern European term for a grandmother, and it refers to the skirt, the pleated skirt that a grandmother would have worn when she was cooking. So what you're going to do with babka is you're making brioche dough, and you're making melted chocolate that may or may not have a little bit of cream or butter. And I put both in mine and some cinnamon. Heat that up together like you were making a ganache. Let it cool down to room temp or just above room temp. Now you're going to take your brioche with a rolling pin, roll it out to something resembling a square. You're going to spread the chocolate all the way through, and then you're going to roll the dough up with the chocolate inside of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now you're going to take a very sharp knife and you're going to split that roll in half so that you have two pieces. It gets messy too. Chocolate's going to go everywhere.
It's not a bad thing.
But now you're going to twirl those two pieces together.
Gotcha.
Right?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And then you're braiding, right? For those of us that have daughters, so you're braiding, and then you're going to take those and knot them together. So you got one braid, and then you're going to knot, and then you're going to flop it back on itself and make a twist, right? So it's a little bit more than just what you had said. And so that's how you're going to create all those bumps in the bread. So this is the heel. This is probably because I already ate the other part.
the rest of the loaf this morning, right?
Oh boy, yeah.
Yeah, and so that's how you create that look, you know. So there you go.
Yeah. Laura says, John, sounds lovely. And yes, it does. So Laura, thank you very much for that.
There's going to have to be a babka in my future. I've never made a babka, but it's like John has now tortured us enough with this. It sounds awesome. Yeah.
It's fun too. It's fun.
Oh no! Let's play with our food. You know, that sounds good. You know, I'm okay with that. Now, once you twist that, you put it in the pan you put it.
Right. Now you're gonna put it back in the pan. Secondary fermentation. So I did mine overnight in the fridge. We always have people over for Christmas Eve breakfast. So we had a pile of people over. So I got up at 5 and pulled that out of the fridge, and it was in the oven an hour later. And
now, John, this is one area where I'm never quite feel confident. Secondary fermentation. Okay, you've already formed your round or your loaf or whatever. You put it in the fridge and you just let it happen. Do you cover it? I mean,
cover it with a cloth.
Okay, and then do you expect it to rise more, or does that
it's gonna rise?
Because when I put it in the fridge, it's usually over at that point for me. It's hard to get it to rise too much, and I'm wondering, should I not refrigerate it too much, or am I refrigerating it? I don't know how longer to refrigerate it. You put it overnight.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It was more of a matter of convenience.
Well, but actually one of the things that's been proven is that a slow, long rise at lower temperature will actually increase the flavor.
Oh, increases the flavor. Yeah. I never got a whole lot more rise out of it after I stuck it in the fridge, but I think you're giving me a little more incentive now.
So I've got most of us have proof features on our ovens. And so what I did was I put mine in the oven on proof, but if, in the past, I'll take a skillet of boiling water and stick that in the oven, and then put the pan in there, close the oven door, and that works well too for about an hour.
Oh yeah, well no, my kitchen is actually warm, and if I put it on an upper shelf, I've taken the temperature of that shelf, and it's mid-70s easy.
I had chocolate crumbs all over my keypad here.
Yeah.
Right. It is one of the risks we all run doing that. So I want to
Well-
jump in here really, really quickly.
We're supposed to talk about cocoa. We're not.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And do some business. So if you're watching this, please like, comment, share. 6 people watching now. We have 1 thumbs up like. So please.
Only
please
one?
We need to get into the Christmas spirit. I mean, there are 5 currently, so we'll see that. Comment. Laura has been the great commenter. Thank you, Jeffrey, for doing this. If you're interested, share. And then what you can do is you can go to the Chocolate Wire channel on YouTube. And here's what the Chocolate Wire channel looks like. So what you can do is you can click on the now this is my version of it, so you're looking at my editorial interface, my admin interface, but there is a subscribe button, so please go and like and comment and share and subscribe. So thank you very, very much for doing that. I'm trying to grow the community here. And if you add comments, what we will do is we will get to them over the course of the next little bit. So chocolate and butter. We've been talking about bread. Laura's been talking about butter. If anybody watched the teaser trailer for this on the Chocolate Wire channel, they would have seen that we actually talked about butter in that trailer. And we talked about making butter. Keith, you talked about butter failure at one point, abject butter failure, and things like that. And there were some things we edited out of that. I mean, one of the things I love to make, and John, you said you had done this before, would be to make a compound butter with cocoa. I use cocoa powder. One of the reasons why I love the pun, cocoa butter, right? As a compound butter. And you use it like you'd use a compound butter for something like finishing off a steak or something like that. You can add that flavor, and there's a sort of additional richness to what it is that goes on. And I think it's a lot of fun. So you've both had a chance to think about butter for a couple of days. Any new thoughts about butter that have come up in the last week?
John did give me incentive to want to try and make cultured butter when we were talking excuse me, at length. And he mentioned starting out with heavy cream and adding a little bit of creme, like
buttermilk.
Buttermilk. I'm sorry.
With the live culture, it has to be a live cultured buttermilk. Yeah.
And I thought that's a cool thing. Although one thing I thought after we signed off for is that it's difficult, at least where I live, to get heavy cream that does not have a thickener, stabilizer, or gum added to it. Even the organic, natural, whatever, has an organic, natural stabilizer. There is one source. If I go to a Trader Joe's, they have just cream and that's it. But it's not always easy. And I think for something like a cultured butter, you'd want to have just the cream. So a warning to anybody who does that. The stabilizers make it whip nice and all that kind of stuff. I don't really like it. I just like to keep it out and just have the heavy cream. So that's what I would do. But yeah, I'm going to have to try and I'm never a butter nerd. I was never interested in it whatsoever. And then I went to Paris and tasted some butter from Normandy, and oh my God. And I thought, we came with the bread, and it was at a restaurant called Benoit in Paris. And they give you a big slab of it. So I thought, well, let me try it. And it was like a double take. It was like, oh my God, where did you get this stuff? And they said, well, it comes from Normandy. I said, okay, we got to go back to New York and find, Normandy butter. Well, I did. And there was no going back. So I don't use it for cooking, but that's what goes on the sourdough.
We have finishing butter and cooking butter.
Oh yeah. I mean, like
cooking salt and this and that.
Right.
And the other. It's another rabbit hole. We think about this, in wine and beer and spirits and all this kind of stuff. And now all of a sudden we're talking about, okay, are there differences in terms of the kind of yeast that we're using to make our sourdough starter? And now we're differentiating between those things. And okay, all right, what are we going to do with like the butter? These are all just really, really fun rabbit holes. But from a technique perspective, John, I think Keith is right when he says, okay, what we want to do is we want to make sure that the ingredient that we're working with, like the cream in this particular case, we want to make sure that it does not contain any stabilizers, because that's going to affect the texture of what it is that we're doing. correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I made some cultured butter yesterday, Keith.
Oh,
Served it this morning.
I'm going to knock on your door one of these days, and you're just going to have to let me in and have at it.
Right. He's down in South Carolina, so it's not.
I'm
that
fine.
much,
I'm okay.
That much. So we have somebody from LinkedIn who, for some reason or another, you're anonymized, who asks if you were stranded somewhere. So desert island, and assuming your desert island has a refrigerator and you can keep the butter from melting. All right. So we have desert island chocolate, and now we want this concept of desert island butter. You're stranded somewhere. Let's say, okay, your choice of airport. Your choice of airport lounge, right? Anywhere in the world, and they make butter, and it's a really, really good airport lounge, not one of these really cheap ones. And they have, for some reason, a butter bar. Ooh, we have oxygen. I mean, maybe we need to have a butter bar. Ooh, is there one particular butter that you would want to have? Right, John, you want to start off answering that question. And thank you very much. I mean, unfortunately, you're anonymous, but I think this is a fabulous question. Thank you very much.
This is a really cool question. Yeah.
What kind of bread do I have?
Yeah, I would probably. I'll tell you, of the butters that I've tasted, that one from Normandy is fabulous. If you can get any I don't know what they feed their cows or whatever. But I'm sure there are others that are domestically produced that are fine. And I would probably go for a cultured butter. But Clay, you mentioned a butter bar. That would be kind of interesting to have. Because how many people taste one butter right next to another? You might taste them in different times, but it would be interesting to do kind of a butter tasting.
So it's a new restaurant concept. It's called Bread and Butter. And you have 27 different kinds of bread and 27 different kinds of butter. And you can do bread and butter tastings, right? Right.
That might be a niche market, but maybe not as much as you think.
For carbs and fat, who doesn't love, right? Who doesn't
Yeah.
love carbs and fat? And if we bring the French tradition in with grated chocolate on it, ooh, now we can put everything together, and we've got a fabulous kind.
27.
Then you can choose your type of chocolate too. Do you want the chocolate that's highly seasoned or salted or whatever? Yeah.
I'm looking at the omakase menu.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Kind of place. I think that
Someone's for being stranded, right, with one kind of butter.
I would have to point. I'm an experiential guy, so I like experiences. And so one of the things that I would have to say that I would throw out there is that I had an opportunity to go to the 100th anniversary celebration for the Swiss chocolate company Velconin back in 2008 in around Lake Luzerne, which is where the town of Schwyz is located. And one of the activities we went into the hillside to learn more about Swiss cows and Swiss milk and Swiss things. And we made butter, right? And I do not generally eat butter. I don't butter bread. I will cook with it, but I don't eat it.
What kind of communist infiltrator are
right? But I gotta say, there's like almost everything. I mean, there's enormous difference between something you've had a hand in making and you just finished a few minutes ago, right? There's something about that entire experience and being in the place. And so if I had to pick a particular butter, I would want to go and relive that experience. I want to go on a Swiss hillside, in September or something like that, when it's just a beautiful weather with a group of friends, right? Enjoying the afternoon and having fun and making butter and then using that. I mean, something like that would be, but then I'm not stranded. So I don't know how to solve that problem.
To answer, I guess, Bruce Chocolates asked for a brand of the Normandy butter, and I did Google it because it's kind of a complicated French name, but it's called, I'm butchering this name, called it Dissiny butter, and it's D''ISIGNY. So Google that.
Dissiny.
Dissiny, yes. So I thought, okay, that one is good.
So there's the question.
Yes.
This is either Mark or Yuri in Blue Spruce in Colorado. Hey guys, how are you doing today? So Dissiny is the one that you can get, specialty food store, gourmet store where you are located.
Some local creameries that you can find in like farmers markets and stuff do their own cultured butter, and there was one that was fabulous, and they vanished. So, but I'm sure there are others around farmers markets. And Amish butter is supposed to be very good. I haven't really tried that yet, but I heard that Amish butter is in the States is very, very good.
Yeah, I live in a section of New York City in Brooklyn called Brighton Beach, and ethnically very Eastern European, right? And so the Amish fit into that ethnic category. And so most of the markets near me have some sort of section in their dairy case which features Amish produced products. So they come from Eastern Pennsylvania for the most part. And yeah, right. I mean, the last bit of finishing butter I had in my fridge, I finished it a couple of days ago, was in fact Amish butter. And so, yeah, no, totally. I got it. So, yep. And I just wanted to say that Mark and Yuri are saying exactly the brand that they were looking for. So cool. I'm glad that we could help you out there. So what I want to do for a couple of minutes, and then we'll do this, we'll get back to it, is that for people who are watching this live, or for people who will be coming to this, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about how the Chocolate Life works. All right. And so I'm going to go and share my screen. And here is the current homepage of the Chocolate Life. And what we're looking at today, what we're doing today, is we're involved in this presentation, which is the Chocolate Life Live 2021 Year in Review. And so in this top rail, these 3 posts are pinned there, and I can keep them up for as long as I want them to be. And so if you go and you open up that post, what you'll do is you'll see the Year in Review. So here are things that I find were really, really important, things that I wanted to talk about over the course of the year. Some reviews and things like that. You can go here. You can find all sorts of information. This is my year in review. So when it comes to other things, so if you want to know more about Keith or you want to know more about John, there is a page which is called Team TheChocolateLife. It's in the top navigation, Team TheChocolateLife up here. I don't know if you can see my cursor. You click on it. And Keith, you have a page, a little bit of profile where you are. And then it's a list of all of the articles that you have written that are attributed to you. And the most recent one, which we had actually a long Clubhouse discussion, was this one on cadmium in chocolate, right? Which was really, really quite fascinating. And I think for many people, the conclusion you came to was a little bit counter to what most people think about when they think about cadmium in chocolate. That is,
that's you put cadmium and chocolate and say kids in the same sentence, and all kinds of alarms start to go off. And it was one of those unanswered questions. Although whenever I had asked over the years a toxicologist who studies things like trace metals in food, they looked at me like I had 2 heads. They go, "Well, but isn't there cadmium in cocoa and different foods?" And they said, "Is that people do get cadmium toxicity?" And they looked at me and they all said, "Yeah, but not from food." And I thought, well, yeah, but not too many people use cocoa powder like some of us chocolate nerds. So I thought, well, I'm not the regular person, so I want to know if I'm at risk or what I should tell people. So I decided, and then I found I could actually get this tested. So I did. It cost about $100. I sprung for it, and I wanted to find out. I said, well, if cadmium's in chocolate and it's loaded in cocoa powder and I'm eating a lot of cocoa powder, I'm going to be the one who's going to have a high level in my blood. And I didn't. I had a perfectly normal, not even in the high normal. And I thought, well, then I can continue cocoa consumption as I had been doing. And that sort of kind of satisfied me because I looked in the research. I also did a pretty deep dive into the scientific research, and I couldn't find any significant studies that related to cadmium and cadmium toxicity from food, or unless it was something that was, like a food that was grown right next to some kind of a toxic waste dump, but it wasn't naturally present. Cadmium's an element, it's in the soil. Chocolate and or cocoa and other crops are, plants that sort of suck that stuff up from the soil. So that's not going to change. Do we have
They're what are called bioaccumulators.
That's the word I was thinking of, bioaccumulators. And I wanted to say, look, that's fine. We're not going to change that necessarily, but do I have to worry? And after this study, or actually this article and my research, I said, I ain't got to worry about anything here, at least not with cadmium. So back to
at least not with cadmium in chocolate.
Right.
Right.
But cadmium, cocoa powder is arguably the primary, well, not the primary, but one of the most concentrated sources of cadmium in a food that we might eat. Yes, it's present in a lot of different things, but it's really high in cocoa powder. And if even I don't have to worry about it, it's a pretty good bet nobody else does either. So that's kind of what I wanted to get across in this, is that you might read stories going forward that advocate removal or remediation of cadmium from the soil. All good. I don't think we need to stop that effort. But is it something that we ought to consider a first priority? And the answer I came to is no. Nice to have, but not an emergency on any level. Although it makes really good headlines. Keep that in mind as you read that stuff.
Right. So I just to point on that, chef who's coming in from Los Angeles says nasty rumors. Then lol. And well, I think what's really interesting, if I can, Keith, here is that it's interesting to understand why cocoa got singled out. In part because when we look at foods we consume on a regular basis, and wheat flour is likely to be one of them, hearkening back to bread, right? Is that in Europe and in Germany, specifically from what it is that I've researched, is that if you look at the amount of wheat that you consume and you look at the naturally occurring cadmium level in wheat in Germany, you're more likely to run into cadmium toxicity if you eat a lot of bread on a daily basis than if you eat a lot of chocolate on a daily basis.
And Clay, nobody seems to be worried about that,
right.
and nor should they be. And it's interesting because when you look at the reference values for cadmium in blood levels of cadmium, they have two standards, one for non-smokers and one for smokers. And the one for smokers is like 3 times higher. So if you're a smoker, you almost get a pass. They expect it to be higher. I'm not a smoker, so mine wasn't even close to that. I thought, well, I'm not even a third of what it would be expected if I were a smoker. And even if you are a smoker, that reference level is about 1/6 of what it would be before any kind of, you're expected to see any levels of toxicity. So you've got a lot of margin for a lot of cushion there allowed. You're not going to get cadmium toxicity from chocolate or cocoa, period.
Unless you are seriously consuming 5 to 10 times more than is reasonable from a diet.
And Clay, even then, other issues are going to crop up before cadmium.
Right. I'm saying, it's like, now I'm eating half a kilo of chocolate every day, and what's the fat content of that, and what is it doing? So you're right.
Yeah, I would be more concerned about the excess, calories and fat and all that kind of stuff, more than the cadmium, because the cadmium won't be the thing that does people in.
So, John, this is your page on The Chocolate Life. You once got hammered with Anthony Bourdain, Tony.
That's correct.
I used to get hammered at a bar or a restaurant that he was the chef that was actually featured in Kitchen Confessions, Kitchen Confidential.
Yeah.
On a regular basis in the early 1990s. So yeah, and I have some other connections. Southern by the grace of God. Okay. And it says you're in Greenville, South Carolina. I know Greenville, South Carolina because of Orson Scott Card, who's an author who's perhaps most famous for the book Ender's Game, which got turned into a movie. So that's what I know about Greenville. So, you've written a bunch of things about your experience in Belize. Do you have a particular story that you'd like to hearken back to and to say this was really, really interesting for me in this past year?
Well, the whole part of being in Belize, start to finish, because I spent a month working with Juan Cho, who owns Cacao chocolate. And Juan is Mayan, and about up until the 1500s, 1520 roughly, the Mayans were the predominant culture in Mesoamerica, Central America, and when the Spanish arrived, that changed within 100 years. So Juan's people go back thousands of years, and he was Quechua Mayan. So there's 27 Mayan dialects. Mm-hmm. So prior to going to Belize, so I've got a degree in literature with a history minor, and the books I've read, the historical books I've read could fill up a stadium. Not that I'm bragging, but understood Mayan culture from a past tense, right? But when we got down there, we got to Belize, and we always knew that we'd be in Cacao country. Mm-hmm. But when we took a class with Juan, it was more like a tourist kind of thing, and it was just, the whole thing was fascinating, and I said, I got to come back. I need to learn more. And we were going to be in Belize for a year, so we ended up living in San Felipe, which is in the rainforest. Mm-hmm. And we were there the entire month of March and first week of April, and the whole thing, not just learning about how cocoa grows and how you harvest it and how do you ferment it and how do you dry it, that process, but also at the same time gaining an understanding of modern day Mayan culture. And the whole thing was just so wonderful. And the rainforest is, my gosh, we just fell in love with the rainforest. And the picture that you have up there, that's me pedaling down Barranco Road towards.
I've been on that road.
Yeah.
Did you end up swimming in the caves, the blue?
We did not go to a cave. We the place we stayed was on the Moho River, so we swam a lot in the Moho, one of the few rivers in Belize that doesn't have crocodiles in it.
Yeah.
But we hiked. We did all kind of fun things in San Felipe, and we did one of the best things I did while we were there was we took a tortilla making class from a 70-year-old Mayan woman, Mrs. Bo. And Amy said, my wife said, "Oh, we're going to go do this." And I was like, "I know how to make tortillas. Why are we taking this tortilla class?"
Ooh, no. I mean,
no, she started from corn, dried corn that was still in the husk, right?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And now, how long did that process?
Did we do a swap out for the nixtamalization step, or?
Right.
Because that can take a while. Yeah.
Well, so you what she did was she soaked the corn overnight with lime, food grade lime. Now her ancestors would have used ash from a fire. They would have done the same thing, but they would have used ash from the fire. The reason you do that is so that your body can absorb the niacin. So if you have a diet that's heavy in corn, a diet heavy in dried corn, and you have not taken that step, you will not absorb the niacin, and you'll get a disease called pellagra.
Pellagra, yeah.
Yeah. So get this, Clay.
Yeah.
The Mayans figured that out. They figured that out thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
Right?
No, it is.
The English did not figure that out until the 1950s.
Well, what corn, because just corn generically is a term that means grain, and so when we think about corn in the Americas, we're talking about maize, which is different. But there is a sense in which this process, which we call nixtamalization, is one that made the maize a more complete food, a more complete protein.
Right.
And it might have been the invention that provided the calories that are necessary, for a relatively small number of people to be able to feed a relatively large number of people. So we see an explosive growth in population sizes in this part of the world around the time that this process has been invented and becomes widespread. So it's really fascinating. We think about, and then maize itself. We think about its origin. So probably somewhere modern day Peru or Ecuador. Maybe what we think of now as Inca lands, but Inca is very, very modern. So this would have been a pre-Incan invention. They would have bred a local grass, teosinte is what it's called, into what we now recognize as corn. There are a couple of species of potatoes, and now there are hundreds of species of potatoes. A couple of species of peppers, there are hundreds of species of peppers. So we go back and we say, these are primitive people. They don't know what it is they're doing, but these are just amazing observers of nature, right? And if you're in a subsistence agricultural world, then what you need to do is you need to figure out a way to wrest more calories, right? And the way you do that is by observing and controlling what it is you're doing. I mean, it's just really, really fascinating, this whole process.
Clay, this is really getting into a field called food anthropology.
Yep.
And I find it absolutely fascinating. And you're right, they figured it out. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was better than what it was. And if people saw what corn started out versus what it is now, I mean, it would be unrecognizable. Yeah, it was a grass. And it had a couple of little tiny, what you call kernels, and that was kind of it. So they had their own systems of breeding and the whole bit, because that's what they had to do to survive. And that food grade lime, basically what they were doing is processing it and liberating some of the protein and the niacin, and making getting other sources of protein less of a burden. So it was a huge piece of their diet. It's interesting that they got corn. Other parts of the world did the same thing with wheat. Or rice. So there's a grain present, and some cultures have multiples, but it's interesting how cultures sort of found and adopted some kind of grain. And farming grain has made it possible for people to live in cities and groups versus foraging.
No, absolutely. I don't know if either of you remember a cookbook and a lifestyle book called Diet for a Small Planet and Recipe for a Small Planet.
I know I didn't know the author, but I actually heard a lecture from her. Yeah.
I ran across these books as a freshman college student in the 1970s, right? So I was at a place called the Evergreen State College in Olympia, Washington. And the whole idea of this notion of combinatory proteins. So you can take two different foods, which are by themselves incomplete, and put them together, and all of a sudden they're more complete. Beans and rice is, the number one example, that, the amino acid complex in beans is incomplete. The amino acid complex in rice is incomplete. When you put them together, the proteins are now much more bioavailable. And there's some example of this in pretty much every successful culture. I mean, how they obviously didn't know any of the science behind it, right?
I know, but beans in almost any grain. And I think to me today, beans are like one of the most underappreciated foods ever. If people could put what's in beans into a pill, everybody would want the pill. Seriously, I mean, they're amazing, and yet they're inexpensive in most places. And there are hundreds of types of beans, and what type's the best? It doesn't matter. They're all good. Now, combining chocolate and beans, now there's a challenge there, but it can certainly be done.
Chili,
chocolate brownies.
Black bean brownies with chocolate.
Bean brownies. Yeah.
I can totally.
It gives us an excuse to eat more brownies. It's the high protein brownie. Hey, it makes it a little bit more virtuous. Requires actually less butter. But with corn, Clay, they also made a beverage out of chocolate and cornmeal. And chocolate in their world was more savory than sweet. It wasn't sweet until I guess the Europeans came over and decided it should be.
Right. So, it's actually really, really interesting. You should mention that. What I want to do is I can jump over to another thing that I'm sharing. So I am now the technical editor at International Confectionary Magazine, and I've been writing articles throughout 2021. The most recent one, which was in the December issue, is about sugars and sweeteners. And one of the things that I did is I took the first couple of paragraphs that talked about the history of sweetening chocolate, right? Because I wanted to point out about alternative sugars and alternative sweeteners in the context of chocolate. I ended up talking mostly about an alternative sugar, not an alternative sugar, but a sugar which is got a geographic indicator in the Netherlands, which is called bastard suiker or bastard sugar. It's a hybrid sugar. And John, and I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it is a sugar, and it contains originally, and now they added in, but originally it contained a high percentage of invert sugar. And so when you use a mixture of regular sugar and invert sugar in baking, what you end up is end up with baked products which have a very, very different mouthfeel. They feel much, much wetter. And there's a fabulous chocolate maker I know, Heinz and Vera, in Rotterdam, and they made a chocolate for me using this bastard suiker, and it was absolutely amazing. So we've got this one, when we talk about chocolate and everything. Totally. Mole is so mole poblano is the traditional Mexican mole, which has got chocolate in it. It gets its name poblano not from the poblano pepper directly, but poblano is the term we refer to for something from the state of Puebla or the city of Puebla. So you have something poblano is because it's from Puebla, and this mole poblano, which is the one which has got chocolate in it, is actually post-conquest. So it didn't exist in the regular culture. It was something that was created after the arrival of the Spanish in the New World. At least that's my understanding of where things are going. But I've had an opportunity when I've been doing this writing for International Confectionary to do something around sugar, something around vegan glazing. So if you're doing panning and you're looking for vegan options for glazes and polishes, they're there. One of the things that erupted into the consciousness in 2021 is people who are fermenting cocoa analogs. So they're taking, for example, spent grain from the brewing industry, right? They're fermenting it using tailored microbes, and they can get out of that something that looks like cocoa powder. And then if you get lipophilic microbes, you can ferment the equivalent of cocoa butter or a cocoa butter equivalent. So you can actually ferment a chocolate equivalent, which is an interesting kind of concept. Generally, the pushback that most people have that I found out is like, what does this mean for cocoa farmers? Right. And so I think that there is a lot of really, really interesting sort of social I'm sorry?
What was the motivation for doing this, Clay?
Well, I think that
other than the fact that learning that you might be able to do it. I mean, is there a what do they want to get out of it, I guess?
Well, so there are a lot of problems in the cocoa supply chain, right, in the producing country. So if we're looking at the way farmers are treated, right, if we're looking at deforestation, right? So for example, in the last 5 years, we've gone from producing 4 million metric tons of cocoa to producing 5 million metric tons of cocoa, right? One of the questions is where did that extra 1 million metric tons come from? So did it come from increasing yields, right, on existing farms, or did it come from cutting down rainforest and turning it into new cocoa farms? So one thing you might say is, and I did an article on the Chocolate Life about estimating waste in the supply chain, right? So there's, if we export cocoa beans, right, we're shipping 25% waste. And there's a carbon footprint associated with shipping that 25% waste. So now if there is a way to take spent grain, thousands of metric tons of spent grain from brewing every year, and take it and then extract 90% or 95% of the solids and convert it into something which can then be used locally to produce. And I'm not this is not something which is designed to replace what we think of as fine flavor chocolate. If I have a cheap compound, or I've got a candy bar, which is a very, very thin coating of chocolate, where chocolate is not the point, right? Then maybe one of the things we can do is we can use this as a part of a strategy to lower the overall carbon footprint of the cocoa and chocolate industry, and we can reduce pressure for deforestation, right? Now, we need to figure out is, okay, how do we make sure that farmers are not disadvantaged, right? That's, I think, a larger challenge. And it is actually something that's likely to be part of the upcoming ESG, so the environmental, social, and governance reporting regulations, which are being implemented in the EU and in the United States. And so, it's a very, very complex challenge, but can we use these things to say, here are some aspects of the chocolate industry where chocolate is not the real point, right? So I would imagine that compound, it's not really about the chocolate, right? If I have a candy bar, an industrial candy bar with a very, very thin coating of chocolate, it's not about the chocolate.
Right. It's more about a chocolate coated something.
That's absolutely true. And so can we, so this is considered to be not a hazardous waste, but it's a waste, and it's often the spent grain from these processes is often, the brewery has got to pay to get it taken away to put in a landfill, right? And so what we can do is we can take it and we can upcycle it. So one of the ways to upcycle it is to remove all the water from it and then grind it. And now we can add it to a flour, right? So as someone from LinkedIn who's watching says, you can also use spent grain as a medium for growing mushrooms, right? I said it can be repurposed into flours, and there are people who are upcycling.
It has a lot of uses. I mean, it's just a matter of the sort of the logistics of getting it to where it needs to be.
That's absolutely right. But the whole idea is if I'm in St. Louis and I've got this huge industrial complex that, InBev does, Anheuser-Busch, right? Can I take it very, very close nearby, right? And then ferment it into something that can be used, right? And so absolutely. And what people are saying is that you can actually, so I had a chance, I did a review on the Chocolate Life. It's here. So I actually, wrote a review. They sent me one of their testing kits, and I had an opportunity to test things. The point that I made is that in this particular format, it's either used as an ingredient in the ganache, or it's used for the shell or for the bottom. If I wasn't told in advance that it wasn't really chocolate, I don't necessarily know that I would have pegged that it wasn't chocolate. Right?
Yeah, and I guess what maybe a lot of people would think, or a lot of people watching this would be concerned with, is that, okay, we can do this, great, but does that mean that some massive company is going to come in and take this concept and take the economies of scale and just blow it all up, so that the intent is not to replace, say, fine cocoa or the farmers in West Africa or whatever, but could that be the outcome anyway, if it becomes cheaper to do so?
Unintended consequences are impossible to anticipate.
Right.
Adequately. And so the answer is perhaps.
You're right.
We don't know the answer to that question. What I want to do is I want to go to a question from Mark and Yuri at Blue Spruce and about international confectionery. So what I wanted to point out was, okay, load the page, guys, is that if you go to the magazine, the digital versions are in fact free. And so what you can do is you can go to the website in in-confectionary.com, and you can subscribe to the magazine, and you can download digital copies of it at no charge. And so as a member of the Chocolate Life, then I encourage you to go and do this. And, Mark and Yuri, absolutely. One of the things that I'm looking to do is I'm looking to get samples of Bastard Taucher. I don't think that it's available in the United States at the moment, but I'm looking to get samples from the guys at Heinde and Vera to play with it. And if it's interesting, then what I will do is I have some people who import interesting specialty foods from Europe, and we'll talk about whether or not we could get bastard Taucher as an ingredient here in the United States on a large scale. So anyway, just want to let you know it's a fascinating topic for me, and it's something that I have.
Clay? Is there a patent on that? I mean, I'm surprised somebody here hasn't done it.
It's if we go and read the magazine article, I don't remember. It's a sugar. It's a process that dates back to the 1600s, as I recall. And it's a result of the way so it refers to the fact that the way it was filtered, there was some left over, which had some sediment in it, right? So it was the darker, it was the leftover stuff, it was the bastard child of the sugar. So that's how it gets its name, right? And what happened is that over time, it ended up being a unique aspect of bakery culture in the Netherlands. And so I don't know exactly when, I haven't researched, I don't know when, is they applied for a protected designation of origin. So it's like a PDO or a geographic indicator. So it's like champagne and it's like other things, but it's for sugar, which is pretty interesting when you think about it. So the answer is, could you create it in the kitchen? I don't know the answer to that question. I think that if you're making chocolate, you probably want to focus on making chocolate, not making your ingredients, right? So yeah, you could, you could make your own sugar. I could find out if it's possible. I mean, it's some research to do that. I don't know the answer to that question.
If they've done it in the 1600s, probably it is. It just may not be that efficient to do it. But
I don't know how much equipment is required in order to get it done. And so, yeah, so we're at an hour and a little bit. So we've had our sort of Christmas Eve Chocolate Life Live. Today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to thank my guests, John Malik and Keith Ayoob, for joining me today. You are both contributors to The Chocolate Life, and one of the reasons why I wanted to have this stream today was to say thank you to both of you and acknowledge the contributions that Keith, you've made over the course of several years, John, you've made in the course of the last year, and to highlight what it is that you've been doing, and say that I'm looking forward to the continued collaboration over the course of the future. So thank you both for what it is that you've done, your support of me, and the confidence you show in what it is that we're trying to do here at The Chocolate Life. So certainly available in the market. Oh, Van Gil's White Bastard Sugar. So yeah, no, totally. If it is available in the United States, that's cool. Van Gil's White Bastard Sugar. It actually should be spelled B-A-S-T-E-R-D. That would be the traditional Dutch spelling. But there are, in fact, 3 different varieties of bastard sugar. So there is a white, there is a yellow, and there is a dark. And think about it as like white sugar, light brown sugar, and dark brown sugar. And what you have is various recipes, which include, caramel colored syrup, as well as different amounts of the invert sugar. And that's how you get to the 3 different varieties of doing that. I'm looking forward to getting some of the medium and dark, which may be harder to get here in the United States. But I'd be interested in, Mark and Yuri, if you're going to use the bastard sugar in your recipes, whether you like it. And if you do, let's see what we can do to get it actually in formats and at a price which would make it possible for you to use it in chocolate rather than having to go to the grocery store and buying it.
Is it as sweet as, say, table sugar, or is there more or less sweetness?
No, it is 1-to-1 sweetness relationship with regular. It is in fact regular sugar. The difference is that part of it is invert.
It's
inverted.
Just
part of it is inverted, right?
Okay.
And what that will do, as John, in the bakery work that you've done, I'm guessing that at some point or other you've had extensive work with invert sugar.
No.
Oh,
my wife.
But they use it a lot in different,
in confectionery.
In
So
confectionery and in sort of
cinnamon,
industrial
glucose,
process.
syrup, something like that.
Right.
Honey is an invert sugar. As it turns
So
out.
it clearly makes it's a little more hydrophilic.
Yes, I mean, so it will affect mouthfeel. So one of the things that it does, if you're using it in confectionery, especially in ganaches, when you're making something, what you want to do is you want to have as low a water activity, so the amount of free water that's available. So free water, for example, in a ganache, in a center, is going to be the medium in which, if there are any microbes, so yeasts, right, in the water or in the milk or whatever, it's going to grow in the water. And so one thing you want to do is you want to control the amount of free water in the recipe that's available for things to grow in.
Right.
And so one way to increase shelf life without actually adding a potassium sorbate or a sodium metabisulfite, a real preservative, right, would be to use an invert sugar as a preservative. So it's a sweetener replacement. Not all of them are 100% one-to-one sugar replacements, but what they will do is they will bind with the water, as you said, hydrophilic, right, and they will make it less available for things to grow in. So very, very
Okay,
low.
so it does create a different mouthfeel, but it also binds that water and makes it, as you said, less available. So it's not that it reduces the water; it just makes it inaccessible for bugs to grow in.
In a confectionery application like a ganache, when you're using it in a baked good, what it will do is it will keep it from staling.
Okay.
Right, and it will actually increase the feeling of moisture. There is, in fact, a couple of traditional Dutch breads, right, which are known as wet breads, and they're not wet breads because they have a lot of water in them. It's just the mouthfeel when you bite them, and it's because of the bastard sugar in the recipe.
Okay, so it sounds like it prevents it from drying out.
Yep, yeah, that's the way it used. I want to acknowledge, Thomas Forbes. Tom has been a long supporter of the Chocolate Life. Spent a lot of time in Clubhouse. I think he's one of the people who was in almost every single one of the 143 episodes of the Chocolate Life on Clubhouse. I want to say thanks. Good for seeing you today here on the Chocolate Life Live, Thomas, and also to acknowledge Chef Gardner. Is Jeffrey? I have been. I'm looking forward to doing more of these. I really like the opportunity that the Chocolate Life on Clubhouse offered me. There were some downsides in the moderation. Well, I'm not going to go into it in great detail, but I will let everybody know here first that in the new year, starting in February, I'm going to go from 1 day a week doing this to 2 days a week. Right. So what I'm going to do on Fridays is I'm going to focus on issues related to chocolate, whether there are market issues. So on the 28th of January, I'm scheduled to meet with two of the primary investigators of a recent USDA study on the global cocoa markets and in the market in the Dominican Republic. And we'll be talking with Mariana de la Rosa and Marika Van Sanfort about that study and specifically aspects of it that would be of interest to chocolate makers. Right, small chocolate makers. So we're not going to focus on the global dynamics of derivative products. What drives the price of cocoa butter and cocoa powder. We're going to be looking at, pricing issues and supply chain issues and things like that. That's what we're going to be doing on the 28th. On Friday the 21st, I have invited Terry Collingsworth, who is the lead for international rights advocates, and they're the ones who have did the Nestle v. Cargill lawsuit and are involved in the big lawsuit going on. And so we're going to talk about what happened since we talked about those issues a couple of months ago on Clubhouse. And then next Friday, a colleague of mine, somebody I've known since the mid 1980s, and we've worked together on a bunch of different projects. We're going to be talking about this upcoming ESG legislation. So what does that mean? And how do we differentiate between ESG legislation in the EU and what's called the European taxonomy, the EU taxonomy, what the ESG legislation is going to be in the United States and who it affects, because they're very, very different, right? And how do we differentiate that from what is also called context-based, right, reporting? So it's going to be fascinating. If you're at all interested in, or you are going to be affected by these things. And within the next 3 to 5 years, everyone is going to be affected. And this is going to be a really fascinating discussion. And
Clay, I gotta get going. I'm gonna go put my steering wheel back in my car. It's
okay. All right. This is what I would obviously think to do on Christmas Eve, is put my steering wheel back on. I want to say thank you very much. I appreciate, we're running a little long, but thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to do this again, sometime in the next couple of months, just to bring it back and just, connect on things, because I think it's been really, really fabulous for me. The hour has gone just by really, really quickly. So I want to say thank you very much. All my best to you and your family, and for a safe and healthy holidays, and for 2022. Keith, you have a few more minutes?
Yes, I do.
Great. So
John, terrific. Happy holidays.
Great.
Send me an email address, please, Keith.
What's that? Oh, yes, I will.
Yep. All right. Cheers, y'all. Merry Christmas.
Okay. So what I want to do is I want to address this question from Chef Gardner. It will not be on Clubhouse, right? So the Chocolate Life Live streams to YouTube, right? Facebook and LinkedIn. Right. And you can look at this on any one of those 3 places, and the video is archived in all of those 3 places. Right. So one of the things that I have really, really appreciated about this particular format, I'm using a tool called StreamYard. It's used all over YouTube to produce exactly these kinds of interviews, is that what I found that I've missed was the ability to see people, right? And to be able to interact and to show things. And while Clubhouse is a little less formal in many respects, what I find is that my ability to moderate here is and to direct the conversation and pre-produce things, I think has great value. And so I'm going to continue to do this. I will occasionally do something on Clubhouse, right? But my goal on Clubhouse is to move as many people over here as we possibly can in the long run. What I also will be doing, right, if you're a Chocolate Life member, and I encourage people to join the Chocolate Life, is to start doing regular Google Meet rooms, right? And those regularly scheduled Google Meet rooms, you can participate in them in exactly the same way that you participate in Clubhouse. Right? So you can enter the Google Meet room. I can have 150 people in the room at the time, right? And you can enter it with the camera off and your microphone off, and you can just listen, right? That makes it exactly like Clubhouse. You don't need a special app. You can use any way that you can open up a browser. So you can open a browser on your phone, you can open a browser on your computer, and you can click on the link to the room, right? If you want to raise your hand, you can raise your hand and turn your microphone on, and it's just like Clubhouse in that respect. Or you can open up your microphone and turn your camera on, in which case we can see what's going on. And so that's the way I want to be able to engage with lots of people. I can record them and then I can upload them. So it's great. So that's fabulous. The other part of it is I am going to be doing this every Friday, and the Fridays here on StreamYard, the live streaming ones, are going to focus on issues which are not related to chocolate makers and farmers in producing countries. And so I'm going to do another day of the week. I think it's Tuesday at the moment. And the Tuesday sessions, I'm going to start in January. I'm going to give myself the month of January to be able to schedule people for February. And I'm going to be focusing. So many people may remember we did a Clubhouse session, Origin, Jamaica, with Nick Davis. And so I had a conversation just completely coincidentally with Nick earlier this morning via WhatsApp. And Nick has agreed to join us in February to continue the conversation about cocoa and chocolate in Jamaica from a producing perspective. So I will be focusing on those kinds of things. We had Arcelia Gallardo, right, as the first one of these things. Going forward, I would have Arcelia on a Tuesday as opposed to a Friday. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to try to get to 2 days a week starting in February and be able to hold that schedule for the rest of the year. And then do these Google Meet rooms once a month on a Sunday afternoon, right, where Chocolate Life members can get together. I will promote them to Chocolate Life members, and you'll be able to participate. And everybody who is a member will be notified of those rooms, so you'll be able to participate exactly as if you are participating in Clubhouse. So Chef Gardner, if you're still watching, and you can comment, I just want to know that I've answered your question for you. So Keith, we're here.
Yes.
Thank you very much for staying the whole thing. One of the things I wanted to talk about is like one of the ways that I do like to use butter, right?
Oh,
One of the things I do like to butter is, I'm thinking about John's babka, right? And right. And I used to live on the East Village on Avenue B between 11th and 12th Street. And this was in the mid 1980s before it began to gentrify at all. Nobody was even thinking of gentrifying. And Avenue B was right on the edge. It was like not safe for me to walk over Avenue C.
Yeah, I know the area. Yeah.
Right. It's just above Tompkins Square Park. But there was a little coffee shop, right? Diner, right? Which was run by a Polish family. And what they used to do is they used to take their babka. When you ordered a babka, the default way, so regular, right, was to butter the flat top and then take this wedge of babka and then fry it on the flat top in the butter.
Oh my God.
Right. Put it over. And
that's a rich piece of bread.
It's already a rich piece of bread you made.
Yeah, well, yeah.
There's something, there's something wonderful about that crispy toastiness.
Right. Well, it's like almost like a caramelization.
The caramelization.
Yeah, and it's funny. I grew up in San Francisco. I never heard of a babka until I moved to New York. Never. and then all of a sudden people. Well, we did sourdough and crab and all that stuff that they do out there, but I got into chocolate out there too. But the more I get into both bread and chocolate, the more fascinated I get, and it seems like they're a match made in heaven. I was reading some years back, or just also again recently, that it was a snack for kids in France to have a slice of bread buttered with a piece of chocolate on it, and I thought, where was that snack when I was growing up? Because boy, it wasn't. That was not the after-school snack we were given.
Right. And now what you want is a really good French baguette.
Yes.
With Normandy butter. Right?
Yes.
With a fabulous single origin chocolate.
No question. And it's funny because for a while there was what I used to say. I divided chocolate into two areas. There was the maintenance chocolate and the indulgence chocolate. And sort of like what's the maintenance chocolate? It's like, well, when you're desperate and you just got to have some. It's like, a physician I know refers to M&Ms as sanity pills. And so, it's like they keep them in the office and it's like, it's sanity pills. Okay, so whatever works for you. But then once I got into indulgence chocolate, I thought, I'm one of those nerdy people who like keeps a log of all the different chocolates that I've tried. My log is now almost 60 pages and over 30,000 words. It's like hundreds of these things. And I thought, this is weird, but it's what I like to do. And they're all a little.
We all have our own personal chocolate obsessions.
It's like, to me, it's, I think it's one, to me, that is, if I could confine my one dessert for the rest of my life, it would be cappuccino and a slab of chocolate. That's all I would need. Yes, but good chocolate.
And a good coffee.
And good, yes. And I really do, by the way, appreciate your letting me invade the chocolate life a little bit and listen as a fly on the wall, because I learned a lot. And while I am fascinated with all the chocolate research that's out there, and by the way, it doesn't seem to be negative. I've looked for negatives and I'm just not running into them. I have yet to find a study that says, "Oh, this stuff is bad for you." My favorite study is, I think I mentioned this to you earlier, was or emailed it to you. It was a study that was done about 10 years ago that required all the subjects to consume 100 grams of chocolate a day for 2 weeks. I thought, where was I when they were looking for subjects? That was. Yeah, that was a study I wished I had participated in. But anyway.
So I just want to let you know, Keith, what I did. So if you go to the Chocolate Life, if everybody goes to the Chocolate Life and they look for this story, right, which this post is about this live stream, right? What you'll do is you'll find there's introductions to you, Keith, and to John, who's had to leave us. There's also a recommended reading list, which is my post on the 2021 The Year in Review. You would be able to go to YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn and watch this live stream, right, by clicking any one of these links. We're going to have a conversation with Terry Collingsworth of International Rights Advocates on the 21st. But there is a fundraising campaign which is going on right now, looking to raise $15,000 to do some additional research in support of the case that they're currently filed in U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. So if you're interested in doing that, there's a donation link. Support them. If you want a little bit of background, so there's an article that I wrote about gaslighting slavery and some other more popular information about that. But if you scroll down below that, Keith, I mean, these are half a dozen links that you sent me
yes.
about chocolate. And I think this is the link to the study, right? Blood pressure is reduced and insulin sensitivity is increased in glucose intolerant hypertensive subject after 15 days of consuming high polyphenol dark chocolate.
That is the study. Yes, that is.
Right?
Yeah.
And everybody in the study was forced. Oh my gosh, they were forced. Oh the sacrifices people make, right? They had to eat 100 grams of high polyphenol content chocolate every day.
Yeah, or 100 grams of white chocolate, because that does not have the polyphenols in there.
Gotcha.
And then they switched.
Oh.
So everybody got the same treatment. So that way they, it's sort of a randomized control trial. They sort of act as their own controls. And it went on for 2 weeks, only 2 weeks. After that, you can continue it on your own, I suppose.
But even after 2 weeks, there was a positive. So we always have this problem. Does correlation imply causation? Right. And I think what it is that you're doing, would they able to actually demonstrate a causative link, not just correlation.
Right. Whenever, for anybody listening, when you see headlines that say this food is linked with this health condition, that is usually an association study. It does not show cause and effect. It is not designed to show cause and effect. It is interpreted as cause and effect. One of my pet peeves in research. Yeah. And so, this kind of a study, however, looked at an intervention. And it did show that despite, the sugar content of that chocolate, it showed improved insulin sensitivity, even when people were intolerant to glucose. So even they had problems tolerating glucose, it still showed improved insulin sensitivity. So it was interesting with the high polyphenol dark chocolate. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and at a fairly high level. They did insist that they take it in 2 doses, 50 grams at breakfast, 50 grams at lunch. And that was kind of the rule. So you got an early introduction for it for the day and you had to balance out the calories. So nobody was allowed to gain weight for the 2 weeks. So it took a little bit of adjustment. Mm-hmm. There's another one I just got wind of. We'll probably do something about cognitive decline and antioxidant activity, and cocoa played a very large role in that. So more to come on that issue.
Well, as I age, I'm very, very interested in knowing more about that. And I'm looking forward, to your, we have, half a dozen research studies here, and maybe there's a Chocolate Life post on summarizing what it is that's going on here, what we know about.
Right. And these links, by the way, are to abstracts. I wouldn't call them interesting reads unless you're a bit of a science nerd. So, but the abstracts give you a summary of that.
Right. Well, I think it's really important, as we go through this, is that we want to be careful about cherry picking.
Right.
So that you go through the abstract and you could go and say, oh, here is the one sentence in the abstract that supports my conclusion, and then not really understand what the full impact of what's going on, like going back to the bottom of the article and saying, here's what's going on. So
yeah, that's called a confirmation bias. It happens a lot in people.
But I think the idea of, being able to take stuff which is publicly available to be able to do that summary and saying, what you need to do is you need to go and form your own opinion. And so here is the research, and you can research it. And it is a slog, right? If you have not had the training to understand,
Oh yeah, no, it's a slog, and I mean, and I have since I'm affiliated with a medical school, I get a chance to actually access the true study, the entire published study. So that's a plus for me. But also, I actually went in and looked for negative studies. So I really like the idea of getting a rounded background, because I wouldn't want to make a recommendation that wasn't based on good, solid science. And with chocolate, it all seems to be shaping up pretty positively. Obviously, the big disappointing studies are the ones that say you can get these great results with 2 grams of chocolate. Well, that's not working for me. It's like, great, okay, good to know, but I want a little more. But the idea is balance it out, folks, always.
Equilibrium in everything. Balance and balances. I think it's really, really important. So, Keith, I want to thank you very much for being here today, for spending a little more time. I want to acknowledge one more comment, which is this movie, Bread and Chocolate.
Oh, yes.
Just a fabulous movie. And, what I would say is, here is the IMDb reference to it. So thank you very much. I don't know if it's available on Amazon or Netflix or any one of the streaming platforms, but I am going to go look for it, because I have some free time this evening. I got a family thing going on in a little bit of while, but after it, I've got some spare time. And the idea of watching Bread and Chocolate this afternoon is just a really, really attractive way to spend part of my day. And with that, thank you to everyone who's been here at any part of the past 90 minutes or so here on the Chocolate Life Live for Christmas Eve. We'll be back here next Friday and every Friday with a live guest covering topics which are of interest to people who are fans of cocoa and chocolate. And I'm going to remind people that if they like this sort of content, they'd like to support it. They can like, comment, share, and subscribe on YouTube. But if you want to be notified, and this is something that Chef Gardner mentioned earlier, notifications are important. Thank you, Clay. If you want to make sure that you are notified about upcoming live streams, then what you want to do is join TheChocolateLife.com. Become a member. There's always going to be a free tier. So if you want to become, we'll do that. And I want to let people know that beginning in the new year, there's been an upgrade to the underlying platform, which is called Ghost. And I'm going to be able to offer a lot more flexibility in terms of membership levels. So the ways that you can support the channel by being a member, and the kind of benefits you get as a result of being a member. And with that, so again, the LinkedIn user is anonymous. Apparently, it's on Amazon Prime Video. So if you want to watch Bread and Chocolate this afternoon, Amazon Prime Video, yay, let's go.
Sounds good.
Let's do that. So again, Keith, thank you very much. Have a great rest of the year, great holiday season. And I look forward to talking with you again in person or virtually in the new year. And with that, everybody, enjoy, have a safe and healthy and a happy, and we'll see you back here next week and in the new year. Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.